Today I want to do a walk around with the Gladiator. Right now, there are a lot of builds out there with these things. There are SEMA type builds that are way over the top, custom axles, custom paint jobs, big roof racks with a bunch of gear on it, $30,000, $40,000 builds. This is not one of those builds. This is an everyday hobbyist build. This is more of a realistic build for most of us that wheel and also have to use this as a daily driver. So I want to show you what I did and how it's working for me. So let's get to it. So right out of the gates here, I'm going to try to keep my personal opinions of what I think is the best product out there. There is so many products out there that I would be foolish to think that I would know what is the best. However, I will tell you what I'm using and why it works for me. So starting right in the front, under the hood we just have a 3.0 Eco Diesel, completely stock. That's it. I pretty much leave everything under the hood as it came from the factory. I might add an air cleaner, a washable air filter I should say, to improve my maintenance. As far as the front here, I chose to go with a Poison Spider bumper, and the only reason why I chose this bumper is just I really like the looks of them, and I've used Poison Spider products in the past and they've never let me down. So in addition to a benefit to this bumper, if you notice right here, they've actually made it so the winch sits just a little bit lower. It looks like it's maybe about 2 inches lower instead of sitting flush across here. And that's important because it allows pretty good airflow. What I've seen in the past is individuals will buy bumpers that the winch sits down in the frame rails. The problem with some of those bumpers is as that winch has to go down and you have a Rubicon, you have the electronic sway bar here that's underneath, what happens is the bumper has to come out quite a bit further and it really messes with your approach angle. And with the Gladiator having a huge departure angle as it is, that's a problem. You don't need anything on the trail that's going to make it harder for you to get up an obstacle. So another benefit I think to this bumper. The other thing about the Poison Spider bumper I do like is that it houses the factory fog lights, because heck, I wouldn't know what to do with them. I have to put them somewhere, right? So this just makes it really simple. As far as recovery, I went with the VR10S. I love Warren winches. They're like the standard, in my opinion, in the industry. I use a synthetic line. If it breaks, I can tie it in a knot. I can use it with my bare hands. I've seen a lot of people use a VR12 on their Gladiators, and that's fine. But for what I'm doing, in a 10 is plenty to pull this thing. I'm not going to be hanging off the side of the cliff and pulling dead weight. If not, I'll use a snatch block, and that will cut my load in half. So for me, this is my choice. Since we're on the theme of protection, let's jump over to the rockers here. So as you know, the Rubicon editions usually come with some sort of factory rocker that bolts in this location right here, and it just mounts to the body, and that is sufficient for most people. However, if you start getting into rock crawling and extreme overlanding, things like that, the problem with that rocker is, depending where you're at off-road, and if you get stuck, you can't use that rocker as a jacking point. If you put a jack underneath the factory rocker and try to jack it up, especially this vehicle, the rocker will actually distort and bend up into the body and damage your rocker panel here. It's not strong enough to support the entire weight of the vehicle. How do I know that? Because that happened to me. I was actually setting on an obstacle on a rock right here with the whole weight of the Jeep on it, and the rocker bent up, and I had to actually remove the rocker and straighten out some of the bracketry on it and reinstall it. So not wanting to deal with that, I chose to go with rock hard 4x4 rock sliders. One of the reasons why I chose them is that they bolt onto the factory location, so the ease of install. In addition to that, they also bolt to the factory frame mounts. It does provide quite a bit of rigidity. Okay, let's talk suspension and steering. And let's start with steering. So this is where I had my first problem with this vehicle. So if you notice right here, there's something missing. And this is where the factory steering stabilizer goes. Unfortunately, it bolts right about here at this plane, and it is constantly being bombarded by rocks on the trail. It got so bad that my shock body got so dented that I needed to basically swap it out because I was starting to get death wobble, and it was just enough in working condition to keep these 40-inch tires in check. However, without it, I would get death wobble around 30-40 miles per hour. So I came up with a solution that covered a few things. One is I want to relocate the steering stabilizer, but I also, being a 6.5-inch lift, I also needed to raise the track bar bracket. So I went to the internet and started doing some research, and I found Steer Smart's Yeti Steering, and I found their bracket, and I'll show you it. So this is their bracket here, and so this is the factory location where your track bar bolts. This is the new location. In addition, it provides you a mount for a steering stabilizer, and it also mounts your sway bar. So you have a mounting location here that is secured. You have this that is secured. And then also back here, it incorporates 2 factory bolt holes that also bolt this bracket onto. So to me, I thought that was a pretty big deal because it gave me the options to really have something that was going to be strong, that had multiple areas that it could be secured to. In addition, you can also weld it to the axle if you needed. When compared to other track bar brackets on the market, this is pretty much what's out there now in the market. And so what this does is it bolts right in there. It has this location that the stabilizer bolts to, and then your factory track bar bolts in the top hole there. If you notice, there's only about 1.25 inches space between these 2 holes. There's 3 inches here. Having a 6.5-inch lift, I wanted my track bar bracket a little elevated to match my drag length. Right now I'm just using the factory track bar, and my front axle's only off 1/4 inch. So far so good. So I went with an Evo 6.5-inch enforcer lift. That's essentially all 4 coils, front lower control arms, upper rear control arms, and all the hardware, bracketry, extended links, everything you need to lift the Jeep. The only thing that is missing are shocks. So with that 6.5-inch lift, I had a couple issues with this thing right out of the gate. So these coil bases down here, these are aftermarket. These are metal cloak, polyurethane type bases. And the problem is down here, the factory comes with a plastic coil correction pad, and that pad distorts. And when it distorts, this spring tends to bow a little bit. And when you have that bowing, then you don't have a natural cycle of the suspension, and you start hearing noises. And so I had to replace these correction pads. I did replace the factory ones with these, and this actually straightened up my coil perpendicular up and down. I also added some of these isolators. Just as the spring compresses, it actually quiets it down quite a bit. This was quite noisy when I first put it on until I made these corrections. Okay, I went with Fox shocks, just the 2-inch smooth bodies. The reason why I had to go with that shock is I had plans to do an adjustable King shock or an adjustable Fox shock, you know, with a reservoir. However, because of the situation with COVID and manufacturing, that I was 8 months out on some shocks, and so I had to find the quickest shock that they can get to me that would work for a 6-inch lift. So that's the only reason why those shocks are on right now. And however, I haven't been unhappy with them, but I don't know if they control the body roll as much as I would like. To be honest with you, the Mopar 2.5-inch smooth bodies I felt were much better. Evo uses Johnny joints in all their suspension, as far as I'm aware. And in my opinion, as far as being a hobbyist and having a really strong joint that's going to last with some heavy off-road use, probably one of the better ways to go. There are other joints on the market, some a lot quieter, some, you know, dampen vibration a lot more, like your rubber ones, or your Terraflex has an IR bushing, Metal Cloak has a similar type, durometer type bushing that is a lot quieter. But as far as durability, I don't know if they're quite the same as a Johnny joint. I think that's kind of your best of both worlds. But again, my opinion, and I've never owned the other joints, so I can't really speak for them. So one of the things I did want to point out was, one of the things I had to add, as you can see it here, is that drop down bracket. So when I first bought the lift, I did not buy the drop down bracket. And what I noticed going down the highway is when I would step on the brakes, you know, really aggressively, the front of the whole Jeep would just collapse down. You had to grab the steering wheel to maintain control. So because of the angle, because this angle is so great in the factory location, it wants to push the front of the Jeep down under hard stopping. The other thing too is, with this drop down bracket, has improved the ride. It is not as choppy. So I have better braking, a better ride. I haven't lost any articulation. The big complaint that people will say is, well, you know, you're lowering your ground clearance. Guess what? I will just stop, put it in reverse, and take another line. This bracket has never hung me up on all the trails that I've done so far, including the Rubicon. It has not been an issue. It's only been a positive thing for me. And the other thing that this bracket does is that it actually strengthens the factory bracket, right? So this is a one-piece bracket that's a 1/4 inch, and it reinforces the factory bracket, which they tend to be thin, and I've seen brackets rip off brand new Jeeps, right? So this kind of adds some rigidity to that bracket itself. So another sale point for me. As far as wheels and tires, I went with KMC wheels. Those are the Grenades. And then I went with the Nitto Trail Grapplers. For me, I think it's one of the best tire and wheel combos out there. As far as the KMCs and the Trail Grapplers, very easy to mount. I didn't have any balancing issues. I didn't have to cut any excess rubber around the tire to get it to fit. Just went right in, no problem. The other benefit about the KMC is that it has these drain holes. What happens with your normal bead locks is you get water that pools up in here and it starts to rust the back of these bolts. However, KMC has kind of fixed that with that unique beadlock ring. So another reason why I went with that wheel and tire combo. Other modifications that I had to do was change out the drivelines. I'm currently running one piece in the rear, Tom Woods driveline, and I'm running a Tom Woods in the front as well. Unfortunately, there's no way to get around that. When you go a lift this high, the drivelines, the factory Roto Zip or whatever the hell they're called, they don't hold up. In fact, after my first run, I had the stock drivelines on, and both rubber boots on both the CVs had split because of the angles, and then oil just started spitting out. And so it was only a matter of time before they fit. Another one of the modifications that was necessary in order to fit the 40-inch rubber is I had to go with a fender chop kit. And there's plenty of manufacturers out there that that make these. I went with Arctics just for the simple reason I was able to get it the quickest. This bracket here, this is where the factory fender liner attaches to. So you gain this, because in stock form, your liner's about right here. So you gain quite a bit of clearance by doing this chop kit. As you can see, I also went with a plastic fender liner by Paramount. I went with that just for the simplicity, and I like the way it looks. It looks factory, and it was very inexpensive compared to all the aluminum ones that were out there. So in summary, what I really wanted to show you is, you know, you can build this thing and it doesn't have to be over the top. And being out there, I couldn't find anything, right? Everything is either way over the top or it's stock where I can't use it, or it's got 35s on it, which 35s on this thing, it's just too small in my opinion, unless you just want to do, you know, graded roads and backcountry roads, forest roads, those type of things. If you want to do anything in Moab or Sand Hollow or the Rubicon Trail, anything more aggressive, I think 37s are at least your starting bare minimum point. I think 40s are more suited for this vehicle, and you can see that in my trails. I'm running 6 and 7s, sometimes an 8 or a 9, and I'm getting through these trails, but I still have struggles with breakover and departure angles. I wanted to show that you can build a Gladiator like this for about $5,000. That's about what I'm into. All the accessories, the aftermarket stuff is about $5,000 total, and you can do it. Doesn't have to be, you know, a $30,000 build. You can put $5,000 into a Gladiator and go out and have some fun. Again, this is a hobbyist build, and my whole goal with this whole channel is, one, is I'm just cataloging my adventures. That's the reality. But two, I want to show everybody out there, hey, if you hone in your driving skills, you can take a factory vehicle like this with factory parts and add a few modifications to it and go out and run some of the hardest trails out in the country and not have to add all this extra stuff. Yeah, the extra stuff is fun, don't get me wrong, and this will get upgraded as we break it, right? But with my driving style, I'm pretty sure I can keep this thing going for a long time just as it sits. I might have to do some service to joints and things like that and whatnot, but that's what you get with a Jeep, right? So anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm on Facebook, but you can also send me a message via YouTube. If you want to come into town and go wheeling with me, hit me up. I'm happy to take you out. So anyways, hope you enjoyed it. Have fun and cheers.